The early morning sun barely filtered through the blinds when Derek's phone rang. He fumbled for it on the nightstand, his heart already racing before he'd even seen the caller ID. It was 5:43 a.m. Nothing good ever came from calls at this hour. Hello? His voice was thick with sleep. Derek, it's Aunt Paula. The tremor in her voice told him everything before she even spoke the words. Your dad, Richard, he's gone, honey. Heart attack in his sleep last night. The world seemed to stop. Derek sat up in bed, his free hand gripping the sheets as if to anchor himself to something solid while everything else spun around him. I'll be there today, he managed to say, his mind already racing ahead to flight bookings and work arrangements. At 32, Derek had built a good life for himself. After graduating from college with honors, he'd worked his way up at a tech company, eventually becoming one of their senior software engineers. His adoptive father Richard had always been proud of him, calling him the smartest investment I ever made with that hearty laugh of his. Richard Whitmore had welcomed 8-year-old Derek into the family after his biological parents died in a car accident. Despite being the only black member of the otherwise white Whitmore family, Derek had always felt loved by Richard and his wife Helen, who had passed away 3 years earlier from cancer. The only cloud in those years had been his relationship with his adoptive brother Thomas. 2 years older than Derek, Thomas had never fully accepted him into the family, maintaining a cold politeness that occasionally slipped to reveal something uglier underneath. 6 hours later, Derek pulled his rental car into the long driveway of the Whitmore family home in Connecticut. The grand colonial house looked exactly as he remembered it, but somehow emptier now, knowing his father would never again come bounding down those front steps to greet him with a bear hug. As he reached for his suitcase in the trunk, he heard the front door open. Thomas stood there, dressed impeccably in a dark suit despite the informal nature of the day. No funeral arrangements had even been made yet. You made good time, Thomas said flatly, not bothering to come down the steps. I took the first flight I could get, Derek replied, hauling his suitcase up the pathway. He noticed Thomas didn't offer to help. Some things never changed. Inside, the house was filled with flowers and casseroles brought by neighbors and family friends. Aunt Paula hugged him tightly, her small frame shaking with grief. He was so proud of you, she whispered, always talking about his brilliant son out west. Thomas cleared his throat behind them. Harrison needs to speak with everyone. He's in Dad's study. Harrison Wells had been the Whitmore family lawyer for over 30 years, a tall, thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who always seemed to be frowning slightly. He rose from behind Richard's desk as they entered. Something about seeing him in his father's chair made Derek's skin crawl. Ah, Derek, good of you to join us promptly. Harrison gestured toward the leather chairs facing the desk. Please, both of you, sit down. The lawyer shuffled some papers, his expression grave. I know this is a difficult time, but Richard was very clear about wanting his affairs handled promptly. He adjusted his glasses. The funeral will be on Friday, as per his wishes, a small private service. Derek nodded numbly. It seemed surreal to be discussing these things, as if they were talking about a business meeting and not the final goodbye to the man who had given him everything. Now, as to the matter of the will, Harrison paused, glancing at Thomas before turning his attention fully to Derek. I'm afraid I have some difficult news for you, Derek. Something in the lawyer's tone made Derek sit up straighter. Richard's will is quite specific. The family home, business holdings, and majority of his assets will pass to Thomas as his biological son. Harrison's voice was clinical, detached. I'm sorry to say that you, as an adopted child, were not included in the final inheritance plan. The words hit Derek like a physical blow. Not because of the money, he had his own career and had never expected wealth, but because it felt like a rejection from beyond the grave. That doesn't sound like Dad, he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. People change their minds as they get older. Thomas cut in, not quite hiding the satisfaction in his voice. Dad was becoming more traditional in his thinking. Harrison nodded solemnly. Richard did provide for a small educational trust that was established when you were adopted. That remains yours, of course. It's approximately $20,000. 20,000 compared to the millions that made up the Whitmore estate. Derek felt dizzy. It wasn't about the money, but about what it represented. Had his father really valued him so little in the end? I understand this must be a shock, Harrison continued, not sounding particularly sympathetic. But legally, everything is in order. Thomas will be taking over as CEO of Whitmore Industries effective immediately. Thomas's expression remained neutral, but his eyes gleamed with triumph. Can I see the will? Derek asked quietly. Harrison hesitated. I don't think that's necessary at this. I have a right to see it. Derek interrupted, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. It's quite complex, with legal language that, I have a master's degree. I think I can handle it. Derek insisted. Thomas chuckled. Always so stubborn. Fine, Harrison, show him, it won't change anything. Harrison reluctantly slid a document across the desk. Derek scanned it quickly, noting the official language and signatures. Something felt off, but in his grief and shock, he couldn't pinpoint what. I think I need some air, Derek said, standing abruptly. As he left the study, he overheard Thomas mutter to Harrison. That went better than expected. Outside on the porch, Derek took deep breaths of the cool autumn air. Mrs. Rodriguez, the housekeeper who had helped raise both boys, approached him with red-rimmed eyes. Your father loved you so much, Derek, she said, placing a weathered hand on his arm. This doesn't make sense to me either. Derek looked at her curiously. What do you mean? She glanced nervously toward the house. Just, your father was acting strange these past few weeks, worried about something, and the way Thomas and that lawyer have been whispering together. She shook her head. Something isn't right. Just then, Thomas called from the doorway. Mrs. Rodriguez, we need you inside. As she turned to go, she pressed something into Derek's hand, a small key with a blue tag. Your father gave me this last month, she whispered. Said if anything happened to him, I should make sure you got it. It's to his private safe at the lake house. Before Derek could respond, she hurried inside, leaving him staring at the small key in his palm and feeling, for the first time since hearing the devastating news, that maybe there was more to this story than he was being told. The funeral home was filled with the scent of lilies and quiet conversation when Derek arrived the next morning. He'd barely slept, the small blue-tagged key burning a hole in his pocket. His mind kept replaying Mrs. Rodriguez's words and the strange, triumphant look in Thomas's eyes. Derek nodded politely to distant relatives and his father's business associates as he made his way through the crowd. Many expressed genuine sorrow at his loss, a few mentioning how often Richard had bragged about his brilliant son. Each comment made the will's contents even more confusing. Derek, there you are. It was Uncle Philip, Richard's younger brother, pulling him into a tight hug. How are you holding up, son? Taking it day by day, Derek replied, the practiced response already feeling worn. Uncle Philip lowered his voice. Something's not sitting right with me about all this. Richard called me last month, said he needed to discuss something important about the company and Thomas. He sounded worried. Before Derek could ask more, Thomas approached with Harrison Wells beside him, both wearing identical solemn expressions that didn't quite reach their eyes. The director needs to finalize some arrangements with the family, Thomas said, pointedly looking only at Uncle Philip. As next of kin, Uncle Philip's eyebrows shot up. Surely Derek should be included in these discussions. It's fine, Derek said quickly, not wanting to cause a scene. I understand. As they walked away, Harrison turned back briefly, his gaze calculating as it rested on Derek. Something about that look sent a chill down Derek's spine. He decided to take a quiet moment in the small garden behind the funeral home. As he pushed through the glass doors, he overheard Thomas and Harrison speaking in hushed tones around the corner. Keeping him in the dark was the right call, Harrison was saying. Once the will is executed next week, he'll have no legal standing to challenge anything. And you're sure those documents are secure? Thomas asked. Everything at the lake house has been taken care of, Harrison replied confidently, I had the locks changed yesterday. The safe contents are no longer an issue. Derek froze, hardly daring to breathe. Were they talking about the safe Mrs. Rodriguez had mentioned? Good. Dad always was too sentimental for his own good, Thomas muttered, treating that boy like he was actually family all these years. Well, blood is thicker than water, as they say, Harrison replied smoothly. And in legal matters, biology often prevails. Their footsteps approached, and Derek quickly moved to a bench, pretending to be lost in thought as they rounded the corner, both men startled slightly at seeing him. Derek, taking a moment alone? Harrison's tone was sympathetic, but his eyes were cold. Just needed some fresh air, Derek replied evenly. Thomas checked his watch. The service starts in 20 minutes. You should come inside soon. After they left, Derek sat there with his heart pounding. What documents were they talking about? What was in that safe that had his father worried enough to secretly give him a key? Back inside, the service was tasteful but impersonal. Thomas gave a speech about legacy and family tradition that seemed to focus more on Whitmore Industries than on their father as a person. When asked if Derek wanted to speak, Harrison quickly interjected that the family had decided to keep remarks brief. During the reception after the service, Derek tried to make his way to his father's office at home. If there were any clues about what was happening, they might be there. But as he approached the hallway, Thomas stepped in front of him. Where are you going? His tone was casual, but his stance was blocking. I just wanted to see Dad's office, Derek said, to feel close to him. Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. Sorry, we've had to secure it. Family documents, company information. You understand. Legal precautions Harrison insists on. Family documents that I'm not family enough to see? Derek couldn't keep the edge from his voice. Thomas's fake smile faltered. Don't make this difficult, Derek. You had a good run here, but it's time to accept reality. You were a charity case, not a Whitmore. The words stung like a slap. Before Derek could respond, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared beside them. Mr. Thomas, the caterers need to speak with you about the bill, she said, her expression giving nothing away. Thomas shot Derek a warning look before walking away. Mrs. Rodriguez quickly grabbed Derek's arm, pulling him into a small alcove. Listen to me, she whispered urgently. Your father was acting strange before he died. He was spending a lot of time in his office making calls when Thomas wasn't home. One night I heard him arguing with Harrison on the phone. He said something about not going along with it anymore and that he wouldn't let them get away with it. Derek's mind raced. Get away with what? I don't know, but the next day he gave me that key for you and made me promise. Her eyes filled with tears. 2 days later he was dead. A heart attack, they said, but he'd just had a physical. The doctor said his heart was strong. A cold feeling settled in Derek's stomach. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, she cut him off. But your father also left something else for you. She pulled an envelope from her pocket. He told me if anything happened to him, I should wait until after the funeral to give you this. The envelope was sealed with the Whitmore Company logo. Derek's hands trembled slightly as he took it. Don't open it here, Mrs. Rodriguez warned, glancing around nervously. Thomas has been watching me. He fired 2 other housekeepers last week, ones who'd been with your father for years. Thank you, Derek said, tucking the envelope inside his jacket. For everything. Your father loved you, she said firmly. Never doubt that. That night, alone in his hotel room, Derek carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with his father's unmistakable handwriting. Derek, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I've discovered troubling information about the company and Thomas's activities. Harrison is involved. Do not trust him. The truth is, in the lake house, safe. Code 08-1799. Be careful, son. They're desperate people. I've always been proud to call you my son. Love, Dad. Derek stared at the paper, a mixture of emotions washing over him. Grief at seeing his father's handwriting, knowing he'd never see him again. relief that his father hadn't rejected him after all, and fear at what the note implied. The date in the code, August 17, 1999, was the day Derek had officially been adopted. His father had always celebrated it as a second birthday for him. He reached for his phone to book a car. The lake house was about 2 hours away, and Harrison had mentioned changing the locks, but they didn't know he had a key to the safe itself. As he packed a small overnight bag, Derek's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Watch your back. Not everyone at the funeral was mourning. Some were making sure." The cryptic warning sent another chill through him. Who had sent it? And what exactly had his father discovered that might have cost him his life? One thing was certain. He needed to get to that lake house and find out what was in that safe before Thomas and Harrison realized he knew about it. His father had trusted him with this final task, and he wouldn't let him down. As he slipped out of the hotel in the darkness, Derek couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The game had changed, and he was playing for much higher stakes than just an inheritance. He might be playing for justice and his own safety. The drive to the lake house took longer than Derek remembered. Rain pounded against the windshield as his rental car wound along the dark country roads, the headlights catching the shimmer of water droplets on the trees that lined the way. Every few minutes he checked his rearview mirror, that text message still playing in his mind. "Watch your back." The Whitmore Lake House had been Derek's favorite place growing up. Summers spent swimming and fishing, winters huddled by the fireplace while his dad told stories. It was smaller and cozier than their main home, a place where Richard Whitmore had seemed more relaxed, more himself. It was also where he'd first brought 8-year-old Derek after the adoption was finalized, showing him the room that would be his whenever you need a quiet place. As he pulled up the gravel driveway, Derek cut the headlights. If Harrison had indeed changed the locks, someone might be watching the property. The house sat dark and silent, rainwater cascading from its eaves. Using the flashlight on his phone, he made his way around to the back, where a loose board in the deck had served as his and his dad's secret hiding place for the spare key. To his relief, the board still wiggled free. Even more surprising, the old copper key was still there, untouched. Either Harrison didn't know about this entrance, or he hadn't been as thorough as he claimed. The back door creaked as Derek pushed it open, the familiar smell of pine and old books washing over him. He stood still for a moment, listening for any sign that he wasn't alone. Nothing but the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the drumming of rain on the roof. "Okay, Dad," he whispered. "Let's see what you wanted me to find." The office was at the end of the hall, a small room overlooking the lake with built-in bookshelves and a desk that had belonged to Derek's grandfather. The safe was behind a painting of the lake at sunset, one that Derek himself had painted. In high school art class, the painting swung away easily, revealing the wall safe. Derek's hand trembled slightly as he punched in the code, 08-1799. When the light turned green and the door clicked open, he let out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Inside were several folders, a small box, and a leather-bound journal. Derek carried everything to the desk, spreading the contents out carefully. The first folder contained what appeared to be financial records from Whitmore Industries, spreadsheets, bank statements, transaction logs. As he flipped through them, certain entries were highlighted in his father's distinctive red pen. Large. Sums transferred to offshore accounts. Discrepancies between reported earnings and actual deposits. Notes in the margins like "asked T about this," "claims accounting error," and "third error this quarter." Something's not right. The second folder held legal documents, amendments to the company charter, changes to shareholding structures, and most startlingly, a completely different will than the one Harrison had shown him. This will, dated just 3 weeks before his father's death, clearly left equal shares of the estate to both Derek and Thomas, with Derek specifically named to take over as CEO. "What the hell?" Derek murmured, his heart racing. This will had been properly signed and notarized. It was the legal document, not whatever Harrison had presented. The leather journal seemed to be his father's private record, dating back 6 months. Derek began reading, and the story that unfolded made his blood run cold. Richard had discovered Thomas and Harrison siphoning money from the company into private accounts. When confronted, Thomas had first denied everything, then claimed it was just borrowing to cover gambling debts. But as Richard dug deeper, he found evidence of something much worse. They'd been selling proprietary technology to competitors, putting the entire company at risk. "I can't believe it's come to this," one entry read. "My own son and the man I've trusted with my legal affairs for 30 years, conspiring not just to steal from me, but to destroy everything I've built. Harrison suggested I take some time to think before going public." The threat was thinly veiled. "I need to protect Derek and the company. I've changed my will and left evidence with 3 separate parties." The final entry, dated just 2 days before his death, was the most chilling. "Meeting with Thomas tomorrow. He doesn't know I've recorded our last conversation where he essentially admitted everything. Harrison is trying to intimidate me, suggesting my heart might not handle the stress of a public scandal. As if I didn't recognize a threat when I hear one. If anything happens to me, the safety deposit box at First National has everything Derek will need." Derek sat back in the chair, his mind reeling. They had threatened his father, and given the timing of his sudden heart attack, it wasn't hard to connect the dots. The small box was the last item from the safe. Inside was a USB drive, a key labeled FN Box 437, and something else that made Derek's breath catch: a DNA test result. According to the paperwork, Richard had submitted samples from himself and Derek. The results showed a 99.9% probability that they were biologically father and son. "That's impossible," Derek whispered to himself. He'd been adopted after his parents died. Richard had never given any indication. A note was paper-clipped to the results. "I should have told you long ago. Your mother was Eliza Reynolds. We were young. She moved away before I knew she was pregnant. I only learned of your existence after the accident that took her and her husband's lives. Finding you was like getting a second chance I never deserved. I couldn't tell you then. It felt wrong, like I was trying to erase the man who raised you for those first 8 years. But you deserve to know the truth now. You've always been my son, in every way that matters." Tears blurred Derek's vision. All these years, he'd actually been Richard's biological son. And Thomas must not know. That would explain his lifelong resentment, but not the full extent of his betrayal. A floorboard creaked somewhere in the house. Derek froze, listening intently. Another creak, closer this time. Someone else was in the house. Moving quickly, he gathered the documents in the box, shoving them into his backpack. The journal he slipped into his jacket pocket. Just as he was closing the safe, a shadow fell across the doorway. Well, look who decided to do some late-night reading." Derek spun around. A man he recognized as one of Thomas's friends from college stood there, an unsettling smile on his face. "Greg, what are you doing here?" "Funny, I was about to ask you the same thing." Greg stepped into the room, his hand moving toward his pocket. "Thomas thought you might make a little trip out here. Asked me to keep an eye on the place." Derek's mind raced. The window behind the desk was his only other exit, but they were on the second floor. "I'm just collecting some personal items," Derek said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Family, photos, that kind of thing." Greg's eyes flicked to the open safe, then back to Derek. "Sure you are. Thomas wants his property back, Derek. All of it. Why don't you hand over that backpack and we can forget this little break-in happened?" Derek edged toward the desk. "This isn't Thomas's property, and according to the real will, half of everything belongs to me anyway." Greg's eyebrows shot up. "So you found it? Thomas is going to be very interested to hear that." He pulled out his phone. "In fact, let me just let him know right now." As Greg looked down to dial, Derek made his move. He lunged for the heavy desk lamp, swinging it toward Greg's hand. The phone went flying as Greg yelped in pain. Derek shoved past him, sprinting down the hallway toward the stairs. He could hear Greg cursing and following behind him. Reaching the front door, Derek fumbled with the unfamiliar lock for precious seconds before bursting out into the rainy night. He ran for his car, the weight of truth and betrayal heavy in his backpack, but determination burning in his heart. As he sped away down the gravel drive, His phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number. First National Bank. Tomorrow. Morning. Ask for Linda Chen. She was your father's friend. Hurry. Derek glanced in his rearview mirror. Greg was standing in the driveway talking urgently into his recovered phone. The game was on now, and Derek finally understood the stakes. His father had been murdered for trying to expose Thomas and Harrison's crimes, and now Derek had the evidence to bring them down, if he could stay alive long enough to use it. He pressed his foot harder on the accelerator, the windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm like a clock counting down. Tomorrow would bring a confrontation years in the making, and Derek needed to be ready for his father, for justice, and for the truth about who he really was. Dawn broke over the city skyline as Derek parked across from First National Bank. He hadn't gone back to his hotel, too risky. Instead, he'd driven through the night, stopping only to buy coffee and review the documents he'd taken from the safe house. The weight of his father's journal in his jacket pocket felt like both a burden and a shield. The bank wouldn't open for another hour, so Derek sat watching the early morning workers hurry by, his mind piecing together a plan. The mysterious texter had directed him to ask for Linda Chen. The name sounded vaguely familiar, perhaps one of his father's business associates. Whoever she was, she apparently held another piece of this increasingly dangerous puzzle. His phone buzzed. Thomas, where are you? The message read. We need to discuss some final arrangements before you head home. Derek didn't respond. 10 minutes later, another text came through. Greg told me about your little treasure hunt. Whatever you think you found won't hold up. Be smart about this. Some things are better left alone. The threat wasn't even veiled anymore. Derek turned off his phone and slipped it into his backpack. Let them wonder where he was. When the bank finally opened, Derek straightened his rumpled suit as best he could and walked in, trying to project confidence despite his exhaustion. At the information desk, a young woman looked up with a practiced smile. I need to speak with Linda Chen, please, Derek said quietly. It's about Richard Whitmore. The smile faltered slightly. May I ask who's inquiring? Derek Whitmore. His son. She nodded and picked up a phone, speaking too softly for him to hear. After a brief conversation, she directed him to take the elevator to the 3rd floor. The woman who met him there wasn't what he expected. Linda Chen was in her 60s with short silver hair and sharp eyes that assessed him immediately. She led him to a private office without a word, closing the door firmly behind them. I've been waiting for you, she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. I'm sorry about Richard. He was a good man, one of the few truly honest people I've known in the financial world. You knew my father well? 25 years. I was chief financial officer at Whitmore Industries before I moved to banking. Richard and I stayed close. She studied his face. You look like him, you know. Around the eyes. The DNA test results flashed in Derek's mind. So I've recently discovered. Understanding crossed her features. He told you then. Finally. Not exactly. I found a DNA test in his safe at the lake house, along with evidence that Thomas and Harrison have been embezzling from the company and selling trade secrets. Derek leaned forward. I also found his real will, not the fake one they presented after his death. Linda's expression hardened. Those bastards. I knew something was wrong when Richard called me 3 weeks ago sounding afraid. Richard Whitmore was never afraid of anything. He left something for me here? A safety deposit box? She nodded, standing. Follow me. They took another elevator down to the vault level. After verifying Derek's identification, a bank officer led them to box 437. Using both the key from the lake house and the bank's master key, they opened it together. Inside was a thick manila envelope and a smaller white envelope with 4. Derek read first written on it in his father's handwriting. Linda gave him privacy in a small viewing room. The white envelope contained a single page. Derek, if you're reading this, then my suspicions were correct, and I didn't survive to fix this mess myself. In this box is evidence I've gathered against Thomas and Harrison, financial records, recorded conversations, and documentation of their industrial espionage. Take this to Philip Garcia at the district attorney's office. He's expecting it if something happens to me. The company, your company now, is still strong despite their theft. The real will is with my personal attorney, Rebecca Wong, not Harrison. Call her immediately. I'm sorry for keeping secrets from you. I thought I was protecting you, but perhaps I was protecting myself from past mistakes. You are my son in every way that matters. Biology is just a footnote to the life we've shared. Be careful. They're desperate people who've already shown what they're willing to do. Love always, Dad. Derek wiped away tears as he opened the manila envelope. Inside was a USB drive labeled Conversations, copies of bank transfers, emails between Thomas and competitors, and photos of Harrison meeting with known representatives of rival companies. His hands were shaking as he gathered everything back into the envelope. His father had known they might kill him. He'd prepared for it, leaving breadcrumbs only Derek would understand. Thank you, he said to Linda when he emerged. Did you know what was in there? Not everything, just that it was important and potentially dangerous. Richard made me promise to watch for you if anything happened to him. She pressed a business card into his hand. Rebecca Wong's contact information. Call her now. The next 2 hours were a blur. The call to Rebecca Wong confirmed everything. The will Derek had found was legitimate, and Harrison had committed fraud by presenting a different document. As Richard's personal attorney, separate from company matters, she had been preparing to challenge Harrison's actions when Derek contacted her. The visit to the district attorney's office took longer. Philip Garcia, a serious man with tired eyes, reviewed the evidence methodically, asking pointed questions about timelines and sources. Your father came to me a month ago, Garcia finally said, looking up from the files. He was building a case against both your brother and Harrison Wells. The allegations are extremely serious. Embezzlement, corporate espionage, and now with this evidence we may be looking at implicating them in your father's death. You think they actually... Derek couldn't finish the sentence. The medical examiner found nothing suspicious at the time, but with this context we'll request a deeper toxicology screening. Some heart attacks can be induced with the right pharmaceutical cocktail. The timing is certainly suspicious. Garcia closed the folder. I'm going to need you to sit tight while we prepare warrants. Where are you staying? Nowhere at the moment. I can't go back to my hotel. They know where it is. Garcia nodded. We'll arrange secure accommodation. This will move quickly now, but I need to ask you not to confront Thomas or Harrison directly. They've already shown what they're capable of. But even as Derek agreed, his phone buzzed with an email from Thomas, sent to the entire company. Whitmore Industries announcement. Join us today at 3 p.m. for an important company-wide meeting. I will be officially assuming the role of CEO following my father's wishes, with several exciting announcements about our future direction. Attached was an invitation to a live stream of the event, being held at the company headquarters, a chance for Thomas to cement his position publicly. Derek looked up at Garcia. I need to be there. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous until we have them in custody. The warrants won't be ready in time, will they? Garcia hesitated. Honestly? Not likely. Not for another day at least. Then I have to go. Every hour Thomas is in charge is another hour he can destroy evidence or damage the company. Derek stood. My father built that business from nothing. I won't let Thomas dismantle it while hiding behind a fake will. This isn't a good idea, Garcia warned. At least let me send some plainclothes officers with you. That would tip them off. I'll be in a room full of employees, witnesses. They can't do anything to me there. Garcia finally relented, but insisted on having officers stationed outside the building. Don't be a hero, Mr. Whitmore. Your father left all this evidence because he wanted you safe. As Derek left the district attorney's office, he called Rebecca Wong again, outlining what he planned to do. Her response was immediate. I'll meet you there with the official will and supporting documentation. It's time to end this charade. At 2:45 p.m., Derek walked through the front doors of Whitmore Industries for the first time since his father's death. Employees he'd known for years looked shocked to see him, whispering as he passed. He kept his backpack close, containing copies of everything he'd provided to the DA. The originals were safe with Garcia. The main conference room was already packed with people, board members, executives, and key employees. At the front, Thomas stood with Harrison, both looking polished and confident as they greeted arrivals. A photographer from the local business journal was setting up near the podium. When Thomas spotted Derek, his smile faltered for just a moment before returning, more forced than before. He whispered something to Harrison, whose head snapped up, eyes narrowing as they landed on Derek. "Derek, what a surprise," Thomas said loudly, approaching him with an outstretched hand. "We didn't expect to see you here." Derek ignored the offered handshake. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Thomas." "Well, you really shouldn't have troubled yourself. There's nothing here that concerns you anymore." Thomas's voice was friendly, but his eyes were cold. "Actually," Derek replied, equally pleasant, "I think you'll find this meeting concerns me very much." Before Thomas could respond, the room fell quiet as Rebecca Wong entered, carrying a leather portfolio. Harrison's face drained of color when he saw her. It was time. The confrontation his father had prepared for was finally here, and Derek was ready. The conference room buzzed with tension as Thomas tapped the microphone at the podium. His easy smile looked strained at the edges as he surveyed the crowd of employees and board members. Harrison stood nearby, constantly checking his phone with a deep frown etched on his face. "Thank you all for coming today," Thomas began, his voice echoing through the speakers. "This is a bittersweet moment for all of us. While we still mourn my father's passing, business must continue. Dad always said that Whitmore Industries waits for no one, not even its founder." A few polite laughs rippled through the audience. Derek stood at the back of the room, watching Rebecca Wong quietly speak with several board members he recognized. Their expressions changed from confusion to shock as she showed them documents from her portfolio. "As you all know," Thomas continued, oblivious to the whispered conversations spreading through the room, "my father built this company from nothing. His vision shaped everything we see around us. And in his final wishes, he entrusted that vision to me, naming me as his successor and CEO. Derek stepped forward then, moving deliberately down the center aisle. "That's not true, Thomas." A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to Derek as he walked toward the front, his footsteps loud. In the sudden silence, Thomas's smile hardened. "Derek, this isn't the time or place for family matters." "This is exactly the time and place," Derek replied, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. "Since you've chosen to lie to everyone here about Dad's final wishes." Harrison stepped to the microphone. "Mr. Whitmore, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No more private discussions," Derek cut him off. "No more secrets and lies." He turned to address the room. "Many of you have known me since I was a child. You know how much my father meant to me, and how much this company meant to him. What you don't know is that Thomas and Harrison have committed fraud. The will they presented after my father's death was falsified." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Thomas's face flushed red. "That's absurd. Harrison, do something." Rebecca Wong moved to Derek's side, opening her portfolio. "As Richard Whitmore's personal attorney, I can confirm that the legitimate will, properly executed and notarized 3 weeks before his death, leaves equal shares of the company to both his sons, with Derek named as CEO." She held up the document. "This is the real will, and I've already filed it with the probate court this morning." Harrison stepped forward, his voice low and threatening. "This is outrageous. You have no authority here." "Actually," came a voice from the doorway, "she does." Everyone turned to see Philip Garcia entering with 2 uniformed police officers. "Harrison Wells, Thomas Whitmore, I have warrants for your arrests on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and corporate espionage." He nodded to the officers, who moved toward the front of the room, Thomas's face contorted with rage. "This is ridiculous. You can't believe anything he says." He pointed at Derek. "He's not even a real Whitmore. He's just some charity case my father took in." "That's where you're wrong again," Derek said, reaching into his pocket for the DNA results. "Dad was my biological father. He just never told either of us." The color drained from Thomas's face. "What? No? That's impossible." "The test results are conclusive," Derek continued. "But more importantly, I found Dad's journal and the evidence he collected against both of you. I know about the money you stole, the company secrets you sold to competitors. Dad knew too. He was going to expose you. Harrison lunged for Thomas, grabbing his arm. Shut up, don't say another word. Did you kill him? Derek asked, his voice breaking slightly. The question hung in the air, shocking everyone present. The timing is too convenient. Dad discovers your crimes, threatens to expose you, then suddenly dies of a heart attack. Thomas's eyes widened. We didn't. He looked at Harrison in panic. We have requested a new toxicology screening, Garcia announced. If there's evidence of foul play, additional charges will follow. As the officers approached with handcuffs, Thomas suddenly shoved Harrison aside and lunged toward Derek. This is all your fault. You were always his favorite. Even before I knew you were his real son. Several people moved to intercept him, but Thomas was already swinging wildly. His fist caught Derek on the jaw, sending him stumbling backward. Before he could land another blow, 2 board members grabbed Thomas's arms, restraining him as the officers rushed forward. You don't understand what it was like, Thomas shouted as they handcuffed him. Always in your shadow, the great Derek who could do no wrong. I just wanted what was mine. It was never about taking what was yours, Derek said, rubbing his jaw. Dad wanted us both to succeed. You're the one who chose to steal from him instead. As they led Thomas and Harrison away, the room erupted in chaos. Questions, exclamations, phones recording everything. Rebecca touched Derek's elbow. The board would like to speak with you immediately, she said. They're quite impressed with how you handled this. The emergency board meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, they had unanimously voted to recognize Derek as acting CEO, pending formal approval once the legal matters were settled. The company's financial team was already assessing the damage done by Thomas and Harrison, while the PR department worked on a statement to reassure clients and investors. Later that evening, Derek sat alone in his father's office. His office, now, looking out at the city lights coming on as dusk fell. The family photo on the desk caught his eye. Richard, Helen, Thomas, and himself at the lake house, all smiling. Happier times, before greed and resentment poisoned everything. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Rodriguez stood there, her eyes red but her smile genuine. Your father would be so proud, she said, entering with a tray of coffee. He always said you had not just his brains but his heart. I keep thinking about Thomas, Derek admitted, accepting the cup she offered. How did we end up so different? We grew up in the same house with the same parents. People choose their own paths, she said simply. Your brother chose jealousy and shortcuts. You chose hard work and honesty, like father, like son. The DNA test results lay on the desk, still, a shock whenever Derek thought about it. Did you know that I was his biological son? She shook her head. Not until recently. He told me just before he died. Said it was the best mistake he ever made. Finding you after all those years. Her eyes grew distant with memory. He said he'd met your mother when they were very young. A summer romance. They went their separate ways and he never knew she was pregnant. Years later, after the accident that took her and her husband, a social worker found his name in her papers. When he realized who you were, he moved heaven and earth to adopt you. Why didn't he tell me? The question that had been haunting Derek for days. He was afraid. Afraid you'd feel betrayed that he'd kept it secret. Afraid it would change how you saw the man who raised you for those first years. Afraid you'd think he only wanted you because of biology. She patted his hand. But mostly I think he was waiting for the right time, and then suddenly there was no more time left. Later that night, alone in his father's house, his house now, Derek looked through old photo albums, seeing his father's features in his own face for the first time. The resemblance was subtle but unmistakable once you knew to look for it. His phone rang. It was Linda Chen from the bank. I saw the news, she said when he answered. Your father would be proud, not just of what you did, but how you did it. Richard always faced things head-on with integrity, thanks to him leaving a trail for me to follow, Derek replied. and people like you who helped along the way. The mysterious texts, she acknowledged. I hope you don't mind. I promised Richard I'd watch out for you if anything happened to him. When I saw you leave the funeral early, I was worried. After they hung up, Derek wandered to his father's study. The preliminary report from the new medical examination had come in. Traces of a compound that could induce heart attacks had been found in the tissue samples. The murder investigation was now official. Thomas and Harrison would likely never see freedom again. On the desk lay the paperwork for the Richard Whitmore Foundation, Derek's first act as CEO. The foundation would support interracial adoptions and families, providing resources and legal assistance to ensure every child found a loving home. It wouldn't bring his father back. It wouldn't undo the pain and betrayal of the past weeks. But it would ensure that Richard Whitmore's legacy was one of family and compassion, not the greed and deceit that had nearly destroyed it. As Derek signed the founding documents, he felt a sense of peace settling over him. The journey wasn't over. There would be trials and hard work ahead, a company to rebuild, trust to restore. But for the first time since that early morning phone call, he felt his father's presence not as a loss but as a guiding force. In his blood, in his choices, in the path forward. We did it, Dad, he whispered to the empty room. Justice and truth, just like you taught me. Outside, the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, constants in a world of change, just like the values his father had instilled in him, values that had led him through darkness to the light of truth.